They thought he was background noise, a skinny kid in a torn hoodie melting into the chill of a South Side morning, until the day his nose for danger and memory for hurt cut through the hum of the city. A quiet boy's hidden skill found its witness in a tired schoolteacher, and what happened next shocked a council chamber, a district, a whole neighborhood that believed it had already seen everything Chicago could throw at it. He rose with the buses. Diesel breath hung low over the curb, thin ice crisped on the metal bench, and Jaden stood where the wind tunneled down St. Paul Avenue like a warning. He didn't mind the cold. The cold sharpened edges kept his thoughts lined up. Count the stops, memorize faces, catalog smells you can't afford to ignore. In his left hand, he held a battered composition notebook with a taped spine, pages filled with tiny block letters and scent maps he drew like streets. The cover had once been blue. Now it was gray, with thumb grease and life. He tucked it inside his bag each time someone looked, the way you hide money you know someone might think you don't deserve. At school, he was a ghost in plain sight. He dragged folding chairs, taped up flyers, swept glitter at the end of assemblies that left the gym floor smelling like lemonade and sweat. He wiped whiteboard residue with paper towels until his knuckles were raw and chalk dust went soft in his nose. "Thanks, kid," teachers said without looking up from their laptops. "Appreciate you." He nodded. He learned how to make himself quiet, how to slide along the edges where no one asked questions about where he slept that week, or whether the sleeves of his jacket were too short because he'd grown, or because the jacket had been brittle from day one. When they glanced at him, he saw the math happen behind their eyes. Black kid, Foster, probably trouble. He carried the addition like a bruise. The micro-slights were starting to feel like the weather, permanent, unpredictable. "Where'd you get that accent?" a hall monitor asked once, smirking at the slow, careful way he chose words to make them sound less poor. "Sound like you're narrating an audiobook." Laughter in the stairwell. Someone filmed it on a phone he couldn't afford. He smiled with half his mouth, as if humor had snagged on a tooth. He told himself it didn't matter. He told himself the heat in his chest was only hunger. That morning, none of them knew his day had already started with a smell that wouldn't leave. Bittersweet, solvent sharp, the way a cheap bleach tries to drown a darker chemical and fails. It clawed at the back of his throat while he stood in the wind and watched Ms. Bryant shuffle a battered leather briefcase against her hip. He knew her. Everybody knew Ms. Bryant. 4th grade, strict voice, eyes with a tired kindness at the edges. The leather creaked like an old song each time she closed it. He didn't think of her as soft or hard. He thought of her as steady, a metronome that kept the day together. When she set the briefcase down at the bus stop to pull gloves from her pocket, the smell surged. It hit the place behind Jaden's ears where memory lived, his brother's last night, the flash of police blue, a room reeking of acetone and burnt sugar, and the thin chemical perfume of death masked clumsily. The breath left his lungs in a tight gasp he hid behind his scarf. On the playground, the voices were wind chimes and police scanners. Kids chased each other between patches of snow, shoes hitting puddles that flashed gray under the white LED glare. Jaden moved like usual, 3 inches to the left of attention, slinging his backpack on one shoulder, counting exits, replaying the smell. He could have stayed silent. He almost did. Silence was safer. But when Ms. Bryant reached for the briefcase, she'd left it in the classroom doorway as she always did while she checked the hall. The stink flared. Metallic, sweet, wrong. A tightness in his skull, a memory of his brother's shoes by the door, foam around the laces. He heard himself say it like a grown man. "Don't open that." Her hand froze an inch from the latch. The hallway buzzed. Shoes, lockers, some kid saying, "What?" Too loud because that's what kids do when they taste the edge of danger and don't know its name. Ms. Bryant turned. She had lines around her mouth he hadn't noticed before. "Excuse me?" "Don't," he said, and his voice came from a place he hadn't visited since the night everything burned. He told himself later that if she'd laughed, if she'd called it a prank or a bid for attention, he would have shut the door inside himself and walked away. But she didn't. Something in his tone pressed a finger to a memory in her own chest. She'd smelled a courthouse corridor after someone unscrewed a bottle of fear. She'd seen what tricks people hide in plain sight. She stepped back. Her breath showed in the cold of the open door like a ghost leaving her mouth. They called the police. Blue jackets, radios crackling, the smell got louder with the cold breeze from the door. Standing there, Jaden was aware of his heartbeat as a metronome, steady, mechanical. He watched gloved hands lift the briefcase, watched faces change from routine to alert. He felt the hallway contract into a tunnel that ended at Ms. Bryant's eyes, and in those eyes he saw the first flicker of how someone looks at you when their label for you slips. "Where'd you learn that?" one officer asked. He didn't answer. Not then. He kept his mouth on lock because the last time he'd explained something important, it had become a courtroom exhibit in a story about people like him who guess a lot but don't really know. The school went on lockdown that wasn't really a Baohui's lockdown, just a lot of murmuring and teachers pushing kids into rooms, telling them to open their Chromebooks. Jaden sat at a desk near the coat hooks, the ache in his shoulder where the strap bit deep, and watched flakes of chalk dust drift in the air like tired snow. He knew he'd just made himself visible. Visibility was heat. It melted protective edges. He could feel all the eyes that had learned to slide past him now sticking like burrs. In the teacher's lounge later, someone breathed the words, "Ms." Bryant would carry for months. He saved them. There was a coffee smell that had gone old, plastic lids stacked like poker chips, a microwave tray that felt greasy to the touch. The principal spoke low, like church. "He's from the shelter on St. Paul. Mother passed, father inside." A pause. That quiet, polite pity that feels like a cold hand. Ms. Bryant's stomach pitched, years blurred, her husband's suits, hard lines, the smell of wool in courthouse hallways, cases won that cost too much. Names, one name uncoiled from the dust. His firm's victory that had cut off funding, a domino line that fell and fell until it toppled someone's life. Later, she would hold a photograph in light, so warm it hurt. Her husband and a young man in uniform, the one who would become Jaden's brother, both in the same fatigues, grinning like they had a future, the month before everything went wrong. But public cruelty always finds you first. It arrived as it always does, in a hallway with phones out. "Hey, sniff dog," a boy in a varsity jacket said, loud enough to pull heads. "You from the shelter, right? They teach you to smell bags there?" Laughter snapped like dry branches. A girl with a perfect bun and perfect nails held her phone chest high, camera blinking. "This one's going on TikTok," she giggled. "Hero knows," her friend added. "Leave the thinking to those of us with parents, okay?" Another boy tipped an imaginary hat. "Thanks for your service, background extra." The hall monitor watched and did nothing. A teacher's smile went stiff and empty as a mask. He felt it land inside him, the sharp thing. Heat climbed his neck. He lowered his eyes because that was muscle memory, a survival code written in the bones. He swallowed until swallowing hurt. He thought of his brother's boots and the way a camera makes a joke heavier than a punch. He flexed his fingers against the strap of his bag until the webbing burned lines into his palm. In his chest, something small and stubborn snapped open like a pocket knife. Ms. Bryant saw the moment the knife appeared. Not a real knife, the other kind, the making of a promise kind. She'd gone looking for him after the police finished, heart thudding the way it does when you're about to apologize for a thing you can't fix. She found him in that ring of phone screens. The smell in the hall was disinfectant and the fake cucumber of a brand new hand sanitizer every office seemed to have, the texture of the floor slick and scuffed under cheap light. She stepped in. "Put the phones away," she said, and for once her voice didn't need steadying. "Now." They slunk back. Some rolled eyes, some didn't. Her heart had skipped when she heard him earlier. It stuttered now when she watched him not meet her gaze. He was shutting down. She recognized that posture from mirrors. She cleared her throat. "Jaden," she said softly. "How did you know?" He shrugged. "Shrugs are cities, whole highways of what you refuse to tell." "Smelled wrong," he said finally. "Like it was hiding something." He hesitated, slid his backpack higher. "It's the same smell from that night." His mouth flattened. "When my brother—" He stopped. She heard the absence like a bell. In her head, Greg in his prosecutor's tie, lists of exhibits, precise language. In her skin, gooseflesh from cold hallways she hadn't warmed in years. She stepped closer, gentle. "Thank you," she said. "You were right to say it." He looked surprised, as if he'd braced for the word lucky or dramatic. Gratitude made him feel off balance, like stepping from a broken elevator. "Do you always notice scents?" she asked. Not just scents, he said, a whisper. Patterns. The way lies feel in the air. Little hesitations. He gestured, awkward. It's like when you listen to the L at night. You can tell what station if a door's busted just from the way the metal complains. He ducked his head, embarrassed by the truth of it. I read a lot. My brother, he took a breath. He told me to learn everything nobody expects. So when they say, you're not enough, I can say it back in words they can't ignore. She felt the atmosphere change. Pity thinned, replaced by respect that had weight. She heard her own voice from far away. I used to think results belonged to people with the right papers. Her knuckles whitened on her coffee cup. The paper buckled. I was wrong more times than I admitted. His eyes flicked up, wary and curious. He didn't forgive her for every adult who'd failed him. He didn't have to, but he let his guard shift a fraction. The test arrived before either of them could decide what to do next. A district inspector was due at 2 to review safety protocols. The principal was pale under his tan, a fine sheen of panic like frost on his forehead. There were binders, there were checklists. There was a broken lock on a lab cabinet and a rumor that at least one contraband item had floated through the school for weeks. If we blow this, the principal muttered to Ms. Bryant in a corner that smelled like stale cookies and budget-grade printer toner, we lose funding for the after-school program. We have 2 hours. She thought of the boy in the hall, the way he'd named danger without flinching. Give me access, she said. No questions. It surprised her, the force in her mouth. It surprised him when she found him in the stairwell and said, I need your help. He blinked. Me. You see things, she said. You hear things. We have to find what's wrong before 2 o'clock. He studied her face for the tell, charity or condescension, found neither, just urgency and that tired kindness he hadn't trusted. Fear crowded his throat. If he failed, it would be worse. If he succeeded, people would look. Looking is dangerous. But the clock ticked, loud and coppery. He nodded once. They moved through the school slow and precise. He breathed air in the lab like a sommelier with a paper cup. Something's masking something, he murmured. Vinegar to bury gas. He tugged open a trash can, hands steady even when his stomach rebelled at the smell of old lunches and bleach. He traced stains with his eyes, followed the way a mop had been lazily pushed around a problem rather than through it. He paused at the janitor's closet, anchored himself like a tree. There. He pointed to a shelf, too neat. He started listing what should smell like what. Ammonia cleansers bite in the nose, but this, he closed his eyes. This sits sweet. That's wrong. Ms. Bryant watched a quiet masterpiece. He didn't posture. He didn't perform. He worked, calm, clean. He found the thing, a haphazard stash behind dented paint cans. He didn't touch it. He stepped back, said the police word he'd learned by watching 100 TV procedurals in a shelter common room where the TV was always too loud. Secure. By 1:40, it was done. The lock repaired, the stash logged, the evidence sealed. At 2, the inspector shook hands, blinked in mild surprise at the school's sudden precision, and signed off on programs that would keep kids safe and supervised until dinner time. Jaden stood in the shadow by the vending machines and felt his lungs unspool. Someone whispered, I didn't know it could be like that. The whisper spread like rumor, which it was. She didn't wait this time. Messias. Bryant took the paperwork home that night, stacked it on a table that still smelled faintly of her husband's cologne and the legal pads he'd left behind. She sat in the quiet, the radiator clicking, the winter night laying a blue sheen on her countertops. And she decided. She showed up the next morning at a courthouse that had once been their second home, the air there cool and permanent, and she filed for a specific guardianship that would make every lawyer she knew talk. She called in favors she hadn't called in since she untangled herself from her old life. When the judge asked why, her voice trembled just enough to make a truth ring. She told the story of a boy who smelled danger when adults were looking at their phones, and a system that had trained him to stay silent. She transferred $5,000 to a fund with his name. It was a small number in a city that eats money, but it was the first number anyone had ever put on a future that belonged to him. She told herself money wouldn't fix everything. She told herself it could at least buy him time. News leaked like all school news does, from mouths that never stay shut. She's making him her charity case, someone snorted at a staff meeting, the room heavy with the smell of old coffee and winter coats. Optics, another teacher murmured with a Swedish smile that stuck like syrup. We needed a success story. It hurt. He felt the burn in his throat again, the one that made words curl. But he made a decision then, the only one that had ever saved him. Let the work talk. Talk is light and fast. Work lands. He began to help with things nobody realized needed help. He corrected a set of safety procedures that had been copied wrong 4 years ago and left to breed errors. He flagged a pattern in attendance logs that revealed which kids were slipping out and why. He read at night, psychology, argument, pattern recognition. He watched debates on YouTube until the voices fused in his head into a kind of rhythm. Then he cracked their rhythm apart so he could build his own. She noticed. Ellen, he'd begun to think of her first name, but he didn't say it yet. Watched him piece a broken machine together with patience that turned the air warm. When her niece, a sharp-tongued freshman with a fear of her own voice, panicked 2 days before a debate tournament, Jaden sat across from her at a kitchen table that smelled like cocoa and orange peels and showed her how to take an argument apart, like a radio. "Hold it up to the light," he said. "See what's missing." He pushed a chipped mug across the wood toward her. He didn't look up when she wiped her eyes with the heel of her hand while pretending it was just steam getting to her. He scribbled tactics in his composition notebook, the same one he'd carried like a secret for months, and then handed the page to her like a talisman. She won. She kept the page in her shoe that day to make herself brave. The district did what districts do when something good happens by accident. They branded it. At a city council meeting, fluorescent lights humming, microphones smelling faintly of spit and Lysol, Ellen stood up and told the room about a boy who had stopped a bad thing. A ripple of laughter from the back row. "Oh, a hero story, great," died quick when she read the police report into the record. Afterward, under the heavy stare of portraits of men who had once run the city like a private club, she found the kid in the hall outside. His fingers worried the frayed strap of his bag. A news intern asked for a quote and didn't wait for his answer. "How do you feel?" she said, already turning away. "Like I did my job," he said to the wall. He wondered if anyone had heard. She had. "I want you to take a role," she told him. "Official, not charity. You'll help us audit safety and mentor younger students. Resources, a small budget, real authority." He almost laughed because it was easier than panic. "I don't have the right papers," he said. "I don't even have a stable address half the time." "Results decide," she said quietly. "Not labels." She didn't add, "I learned that too late, and it cost people like you." She didn't talk about her husband, the cases, the line of dominoes. She didn't need to. The hall carried enough ghosts. The first days in the new role were colder than winter. You don't change a story without someone calling you a liar. In the copy room, which smelled like hot plastic and burnt dust, a teacher held a handout to the new science consultant and then let it drop when she realized the hand she'd be shaking would be Jaden's. "Oh," she said, the word sharp as a snapped rubber band. "You." A vice principal made a joke in a staff chat about keeping our numbers strong and added a wink emoji that meant the opposite of a wink. Someone forgot to include Jaden's name on a calendar invite that determined whether he'd be present at a meeting about the very project he'd rescued. It was always accidental. It was always a coincidence. It always smelled faintly of cool contempt, like metal left in the shade. He swallowed the knot. He let the work talk. He met the auditor who wore a tie too tight and a habit of interrupting. He answered questions with a calm that tasted like old steel in his mouth. He kept track of who was rooting for him to fail. He forgave nobody, but hated none of them. He fixed small things so they didn't become large ones. He wrote procedures in language kids could actually understand. He left his composition notebook open on a desk once by accident, and when he came back, he saw that someone had scribbled quota over a page of careful notes. He erased it. He didn't mention it. He added a line to the page instead. "Keep going." 7 weeks in, they handed him a real test that couldn't be spun. The district rolled out a new chemical storage policy. Half the campuses had been non-compliant for years because the policy had been written by someone who'd never set foot in a classroom that smelled like old plaster and panic. The deadline hit in 10 days. A state-level review was scheduled. Someone would lose a job. Someone else would lose a program. He pulled the files. They were a mess of copy-paste and best guesses. His team, 2 teachers drafted unwillingly, 1 administrator politely hostile, looked at him like he was the punchline to a joke about ambition. "If he crashes and burns," the administrator had said in a whisper that carried, "at least we tried the inclusive thing." He stared at the clock. The second hand dragged. He worked. He walked storage rooms with a flashlight and nose. He found 3 leaks and a dozen lies. He put labels where they would be seen, not hidden by theory. He called a manufacturer hotline and asked questions in a voice so calm the rep gave up 3 internal PDFs just to get off the phone. He trained kids to police the rooms because kids notice when adults stop pretending. He told a junior named Maria that her instinct for order was a talent, not a compulsion to be mocked. He told a boy named Ty that his ability to fix things wasn't just a way to avoid classwork. It was a job waiting. He wrote their names down next to shifts in a schedule he posted where teachers would have to see it every morning by the coffee machine. The coffee machine stank like burned chicory. The schedule's paper was bright and new, the tape clean, the letters steady. His hand shook only once. They passed. Not just passed, scored in the top tier. The state auditor blinked at a clipboard, then reached for a handshake that had been denied for weeks. "Impressive," he said, and Jaden watched in real time as a dozen doubters built new stories in their heads about how he must have had help, how he got lucky, how the numbers weren't the numbers they used. He let them build. The building said more about them than about him. By spring, kids gravitated toward him like filings to a magnet. He became a quiet center. New hires found him their first week and breathed easier when he gave them a checklist not written in District ES. A veteran teacher who had taught 3 generations on the same street corner started asking him opinions in a voice that dropped its defensiveness like a bad hat. In the lunchroom, smell of ketchup and bleach and something fried, Jaden sat with kids whose names nobody said at awards assemblies. He listened. He taught them a trick. The way to catch a lie isn't to hear what's said, it's to listen for what disappears. He didn't make speeches. He didn't like speeches. He made people braver by being patient. Ellen watched him from the doorway sometimes, her fingers around a paper cup that warmed her palm, and thought, how long did we make him invisible? She moved to action like a woman who finally agreed with herself. She pitched the district on a program that made some people flinch, see the unseen. Training for teachers on bias made real, mentorship scope beyond the glossy brochure, open sessions where people could bring talents that didn't fit job descriptions and ask for a way to use them. The pitch smelled like risk and new carpet at central office. The superintendent worried about optics and then signed when donors perked up. They made Jaden the face of it, which scared him in a way the police never had. He'd learned to distrust spotlights, but he said yes because he remembered a boy filming his humiliation and thought, let's aim that lens at something else. The first session should have been small. It wasn't. The room brimmed with breath and nerves and the sour sweet of too many bodies under too few vents. A custodian who fixed everything with 2 hairpins and a prayer admitted she could do geometry in her head. A cafeteria worker described breaking down supply chain problems like puzzles, and everyone laughed in that relieved way. Laughter can be serious. A first-year teacher confessed that she had a stutter that disappeared only when she sang, so could someone help her turn her lessons into a playlist? The room tilted toward possibility, the way sun warms a patch of floor, and suddenly that's where everyone wants to sit. He told a little of his story that night, not the misery parts. Misery porn is for people who want to be moved without moving. He said, when they laughed, I worked. He said it like an instruction, not a plea. Ellen sat in back and felt her throat tighten, then loosen. She wasn't the hero of this story. She was the witness, and the hand on the back when a step up felt like a cliff. The culmination came faster than anyone planned. The district booked a hall with velvet curtains that smelled faintly of dust and old applause. The lights were too bright. He could feel his heartbeat in his wrists. The night had that heavy excitement you taste like metal, anticipation that might be triumph or disaster. He had a speech. He hated that he had a speech. He slid his composition notebook into his jacket pocket anyway, the way a kid tucks a note from a parent. The mayor's office sent an aide who looked bored and important at once. The man who'd been loudest in contempt, Assistant Principal George Randall, a broad-shouldered ex-coach who called everybody chief like a joke, took a seat front row. His cologne was loud enough to push people 2 seats away. Jaden stepped onto the stage. The microphone was sticky. The first row's eyes were sharp. The last row's eyes were phones. He told his story in the present tense, even though everything had already happened. He said, "When my brother died, the air smelled like bad cover-ups." He let the words hang. He listened to the hush gather. He said, "When they called me extra, I made myself essential. When they called me quota, I made them ask me questions." He heard a muffled sob. He pretended he didn't hear. "When they laughed, I worked," he said again, and this time his voice warmed. "Today I'm here to say, we're not staying quiet while talent gets misnamed. We're not going to be polite about being ignored." Silence. Then thunder. The applause arrived in a wave that felt like a physical weather system, warmth rolling from the stage edge to the back wall and back again. People stood, people cried. People who had eyed him with calculation yelled his name now as though he belonged to them. He didn't. He belonged to a different future he was building from weird little pieces. Then, the fall from the other side. Justice arrived with its own percussive rhythm. Randall, the same man who'd made microphone jokes about our mascot for resilience, had a project due that week, a safety overhaul he'd bragged would outshine Jaden's. He'd cut corners. He'd ignored emails. He'd written numbers that looked good because they weren't real. The auditor found it, and because the auditor was still smarting from underestimating a kid, he read the findings out loud. The room watched a man who'd thought himself immune turn a slow shade of red. He stammered. He blamed a subordinate whose name he mispronounced. He laughed at his own terror. It was not satisfying in the way revenge fantasies promise. It was better. It was clean. Nobody's job should satisfy a hunger for punishment. But someone who'd sneered had to look at the ground and say, "I'm sorry," into a mic that didn't forgive. Jaden didn't crow. He shook Randall's hand when Randall offered it, because hands are for building, not just defending. Randall squeezed too hard and whispered, "Guess you're the chief now." Jaden almost smiled. "No," he said soft. "I'm just not background." They needed something to anchor the change. Symbol matters when words are cheap. The board approved a plan to rename the safety lab, a room that had always smelled like solvents and denial. They painted. They installed proper hoods. They warmed the lights to something human. They added a glass cube on a pedestal near the door. Inside the cube, under gentle LEDs, they placed Jaden's old composition notebook. The tape on the spine caught the light like a scar that had learned how to reflect. Next to it, a brass plate. This belonged to a boy you didn't see. Now you do. People took photos. Kids pressed fingers to the glass and then pulled back, as if the notebook could shock them into courage. Visitors came. They told Jaden their own stories. A mother with an accent people imitated when they thought she couldn't hear said, "They told me my math didn't count because my English was wrong." A janitor who had once been a physics professor in another country cried without shame, then laughed about a broken lathe. In the new lab, the Jaden M. Carter Safety and Innovation Room, Ellen watched quietly as the city began to practice a new reflex. That night, he walked the long way home because he needed cold air and the crunch of old salt under his boots. He stopped by the hall with the glass cube. The building was empty. The hum of the vents was a low lullaby. He held the notebook in his hands one last time before security sealed the case for good. The paper smelled like sweat and graphite and hope. He traced the groove of the taped spine with his thumb like a rosary. He thought about his brother's boots and his laugh and the way he'd said, "Learn everything nobody expects." He lifted his head. The city lights smeared gold on the window glass, like a promise that didn't need a lawyer. He whispered, "Let them be seen sooner," he said to the room and to the boy he'd been, and the boys and girls walking by him in the shadows today. His breath fogged and faded. The new plaque's letters shimmered, reflected back at him like a nod. He tucked his hands into his pockets and stood there until the cold bit his ears, then turned to go, shutting off the light with a click that sounded like closure and beginning at the same time. Ellen stood in the doorway he hadn't noticed. She'd come to say nothing important and everything at once. She watched his shoulders, the set of his jaw, the way he carried work and memory without letting either crush him. In her head flashed the photograph she kept on her fridge now, the one with her husband and Jaden's brother in uniform, grinning like idiots. She would never be able to pay for what history had cost. She had stopped trying. She had chosen instead to show up on days like this with keys to rooms and lines and budgets, and a quiet insistence that people listen to boys who smell danger before adults smell coffee. In the months that followed, the program grew. There were more sessions. There were missteps so awkward they made everyone want to crawl under tables. There were teachers who said the wrong thing and came back to say the right one. There were students who stood up and turned tremors into speeches and speeches into plans. There was a map on the wall with pushpins where hidden talents had surfaced, red for logistics, blue for language, green for craft. It looked like a new transit map for a city learning new routes. Rumors still roamed. He's her pet. He'll mess up eventually. This is just the story they want this year. They made him tired. He answered them by sitting with a freshman who trembled whenever he had to call home and teaching him a script for awkward introductions. He answered them by showing a sixth grader how to break down a lie without breaking a friend. He answered them with results, and then he went home and slept hard because being the proof wears you out. There were moments he felt like an imposter. He still caught himself shrinking when someone barked a command, still panicked when a siren sharpened the air. He told Ellen once that he didn't know how to be the person people saw. "I have the wrong clothes," he said. "The wrong voice," she laughed, gentle and honest. "Clothes don't solve lies," she said. "Your voice is exactly right." He believed her until the next time, and then he believed her again, because courage is not a one-time purchase, it's a subscription you renew every morning. He kept his promise to his brother in ways both small and cinematic. He sniffed out a faulty duct before anyone got sick. He taught debate kids how to fold logic like origami. He smiled at the janitor professor and asked him to teach a weekend workshop that turned into an after-school club that turned into 3 kids applying to engineering programs none of their families had heard of last year. He took a call from the shelter director who said, voice splintered with gratitude, "Since that council meeting, we've had 3 alumni come back to mentor. I don't know what you did," he said. "We saw them." When the city gave him a plaque and a handshake, he wore a thrift store blazer that smelled faintly of someone else's life, and he didn't mind. He tucked his brother's dog tag under the collar at his neck, cool against his skin, a weight that made him feel unalone. He tucked his hands into his pockets and made sure the fingers brushed the worn tape of his notebook's spine, even though the notebook wasn't there anymore. He felt it anyway. Memory is a different kind of weight. He didn't forget the ones who hurt him. He let their names fade until they were just shadows in a hallway. He kept the names of the ones who showed up. He took their texts at midnight when fear was a drum and unanswered emails howled. He showed up to help a cafeteria worker fill out a training application because forms are a language built to exclude. He said the line he'd taught himself so many times it might have been prayer. We're not staying quiet while talent gets misnamed. As for Ellen, she wore her own changes like a new coat. She left the old courthouse smell in the past and made rooms that smelled like lemons and books. She filed paperwork nobody believed would get approved and watched it get stamped anyway, because she'd finally learned where to push and where to ask. She spoke at conferences, rooms with bad carpets and good intentions, and named her own complicity without flinching. She looked at the photograph on her fridge and spoke the line you say when ghosts sit at your table. "I will spend what I have left opening doors." Chicago kept being Chicago. Sirens still stitched the night. Trains still rattled and sang. Winter still bit. But in one school on a street where the evening smelled like wet concrete and fried dough and chance, a boy who had learned to listen with his whole body became the person other people listened to. If you stood in the lab and pressed your forehead to the glass over the notebook just right, your breath fogged it enough to write a word with your finger. Kids made hearts there, made initials, made promises. On a late Sunday evening, streetlights humming, the hallway empty, city sounds softened by snow, Jaden stood in that lab with the notebook's ghost in his hand. The glass cube threw a pale halo. The air was cool and clean. He whispered again, because some words deserved echoes. Let them be seen earlier. The neon from the exit sign made his skin look like a different boy's, and he recognized him with a feeling that was not quite grief, and not quite joy, and not quite anything he had a word for yet. He flicked the switch. The room exhaled darkness. The plaque kept shining. Talent doesn't wear a uniform, a skin, or a gender. Remember this story so you don't miss the quiet ones when there's still shadows on the edge of your day.